Welcome, everyone, to our Politics Guys midweek show. Now, you might have been expecting to hear Trey and Alexander since they're the ones who did the Saturday show, and typically that's how we do the midweek show as well. But in the whole Thanksgiving rush thing, I totally forgot to ask Trey and Alexander to do a midweek show, and so then Jay and I were recording our first ever policy analysis, in-depth kind of thing on healthcare, which was a lot of fun. And I asked him if he'd be willing to do the midweek show with me. And Jay, being Jay, said, "Of course,
of course,
of course." So thanks very much. And what we're going to do this week, before we get to some of your questions and comments, and Jay, I should preface this by saying both of us come in for some criticism this week, so that's kind of nice. It's usually just
all
you,
right, well, time. Yeah, I was gonna say you need me for these shows because usually it's mostly directed at
but
me.
Yeah,
so.
but no, we both get nailed this time, which is kind of fun. But anyway, before we get to that, I wanted to thank all of our new Patreon supporters. You might recall last week or show after the midterms, I said we were doing our new goals and tiers thing on the Patreon site, and because I was trying to upgrade, make us try to be a halfway decent marketer, I guess, and at that time we had 77 Patreon patrons, and I said, well, if we get to 100, I'm going to release my all of my introduction, kind of how American government works, audio lectures, and also the accompanying PowerPoint slides. And since that time, right now, I'm pulling up the page. We have 91 patrons. That's been our biggest.
These marketing people know what they're doing.
I guess so. That's our biggest, I think, single week growth we've ever seen. So thank you all so much. We're almost there. I think we're going to get to 100 in the next week, at which point I will release all that stuff. That'll be, I need to put aside some extra time
for
that. The
Baranowski Manifesto.
There you go. But yeah, so we had our new patrons. I want to thank all of you right now. Seth, Andrew, Cody, Teresa, Lauren, Josh, Michael, Rachel, Martin, Sean, Meg, Adrian, Eric, and Ron, all new Patreon supporters. Wow. And also, Rachel and Nick increased their level of support. And the number you wrote in, Rachel wrote in, "Hey, Mike, Jay, and Trav, listened to your show for over a year now, and I can't express how much I love it. I started listening last fall when I was entering my last semester of undergrad. I was taking my last 2 political science courses that were heavily discussion-based, and the timing of discovering your show could not have been more perfect. Since graduation, I haven't missed a show. I listen while getting ready for work, working out, or even to decompress before bed."
Wow, decompress.
Yeah, I think
that's usually not what I would think. But
I think there was a smiley face after that, so I don't know. But okay. She said, "You guys are great, and I'm so happy to be able to support such a neat show. Thanks for all you do. P.S. The bonus of having access to Mike's course and slides was definitely a sweet incentive." Well, Rachel, wait till after you see them to think that, but I hope you won't be disappointed, and thanks so much. Next, we have Martin, who emailed to say, "Dear Politics Guys, I wanted a podcast that could educate, inform, and entertain." That's the BBC's mission statement, he says, "on American politics. You certainly do that. You could improve with a little more humor. Listen to," he suggests, "Romaniacs for an example of what I mean. But keep up the good work, and I look forward to the next podcast." And Romaniacs, Jay, is apparently this podcast about it's in the UK about the Brexit, the anti-Brexit sort of people. So it's pretty interesting.
Well, thank you all, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I try to be funny.
We try, yeah, but sometimes people feel we go a little too far too. Right. I don't know, but anyway, it takes all kinds. Sean wrote in, "Thank you so much for creating your wonderful podcast. It seems like every year our country becomes more polarized and divided, and one of the reasons is because of the hyper-partisan mainstream media that most of us are exposed to every day. Your podcast does a great job at attempting to present both sides of political discussion in a mature and thoughtful way without resorting to personal insults, which is almost unheard of these days." And he continues, "Although I would describe myself as a moderate Democrat, and I don't always like what Jay has to say, I know what you mean, I do appreciate his efforts to share the conservative perspective of different arguments, and I do believe that he is a good man whose personal beliefs just happen to differ from mine. I definitely..."
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I thought that was really nice. "I definitely believe I've grown tremendously over the past year by listening to your podcast, and I credit your show for helping me become more objective and open-minded in my political thinking. Thank you again for everything that you all do. especially to Jay, who is too often vilified by your listeners. I knew you'd appreciate
It's
that
the role
one.
I've been assigned in life, I
There
think.
you go. Someone's got to be the heavy on this show, and it's not going to be me, Jay. That's for sure. And then finally, Seth wrote, "I'm not going to lie. It was your Patreon ploy for more supporters that brought me into the Politics Guys fold. Ha! Marketing works." Then he says, furthermore, in his 1864 Thanksgiving proclamation, Honest Abe declared, "It has pleased Almighty God to prolong our national life another year. And in my own words, I'm glad folks like you seek to engender a kind of dialogue befitting Lincoln's tone within our time." I like that.
Wow.
Befitting Lincoln's tone. Sometimes I don't know if we actually meet that standard, but that's a lofty standard and a good one to shoot for, I think.
Yeah.
So there you go. And so thanks everyone again. And if you want to join all of our new supporters and get us over that 100 supporter mark so that I can release all those audio recordings and PowerPoints, then you can critique the heck out of them. I'm going to love to hear it. That'll be great. Just go
we really should do coffee mugs or something, right?
We actually have.
If you go to the site,
if you go to the site, you can buy Politics Guys gear. Absolutely, it's still there. But yeah. So
we should give them to people.
We should. Well, yeah, we could do that actually. Maybe that's another tier. I don't know. We should investigate that. Good idea, Jay. Yeah. Marketing, once again.
I'm just reminiscent of one of my favorite Saturday Night Live skits was, the PBS Fund Drive, where your choice of premiums of the Robert Mapplethorpe tote bag or the Abortion Yes coffee mug. So
yeah,
you're old enough to remember that.
Absolutely. Well, and of course, an important part of marketing is saying where you go to give us your money, right? That's politicsguys.com/support, or just go to politicsguys.com and you'll see the Patreon sort of thing. So thanks very much. All right, moving on. Now I wanted to mention that as I mentioned at the top, that this last Saturday, Trey did his show with Alexandra, and as longer term listeners would know, this is the second show with Trey and Alexandra. We're trying to expand, bring on new voices, new perspectives, that sort of thing. And after our first shows with Trey and Alexandra and Trey and Athena, listener response was, I would say, kind of lukewarm, I guess. And it seemed to me, Jay, that part of that, I remember our first show. Boy, that was pretty, I don't even want to think about it too much. But that first, kind of first show, trying to getting a feel for what you're doing, and it can be a little nervous making and that sort of thing. And so I thought it would make sense to give both Alexandra and Athena kind of a second show now that they have a sense of things and so forth, to get the listener response based on that, which I think would give a better sense of what they would be like as potentially another like once a month host. So
yeah,
for those of you who've listened to the show with Trey and Alexandra, please, it's really important that we get your feedback. So let us know what you think. And again, mail at politicsguys.com, or you can just respond on the Facebook page and so forth. That would be really helpful to us. So, all right. So let's move on to listener comments if you're ready, Jay.
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go.
Always ready for listener comments.
Oh, yeah. In response to our show on the 2018 midterms, let's see, John wrote in with the following comment on our website, politicsguys.com. Mike needs to be less obnoxious. Saturday with him sucked. Bipartisan, count how many times Mike called the Dems my party. Total crap. And I got to say, this is my comment of the week. I love John's comment because sometimes my favorite comments are the ones that just go off like that because it shows a certain passion. And I kind of like that as long as it doesn't, turn unhinged or anything like that. But, and I think it brings up.
And John was not unhinged.
No, not at all.
Partly unhinged.
No, we've seen unhinged, especially recently in our Facebook group a little bit. But no, this is not unhinged. This is just pleasantly passionate as far as I'm concerned. And I wanted to address John's comments, The Democrats, what we mean by bipartisan, this is why I think this is an important comment. By bipartisan, we don't mean splitting the difference. We don't mean, kind of a mushy middle sort of thing. We mean that I am honestly and openly a partisan of the Democrats, the left, not because they're the Democrats, but because ideologically and in terms of policy solutions, I agree with them far more often than not. And Jay, I think the same is it's fair to say for you on the conservative side. You're not going to disagree with Donald Trump just because he's Donald Trump, right? And so
right. No, I mean it's nor would I agree with Donald Trump just because he's a Republican.
So I mean,
Nominally.
we're not just picking a team and sticking with them, but there's a reason why. I mean, the Democrats are my party. I identify with them. I think there are good reasons for it. It's not just tribalism on my side, but so we're not trying to just kind of, can't we all get along? I mean, we'd like to believe that certainly, but we're not trying to hide our partisan affiliation. In fact, I would argue that that's far more dishonest, and we see a lot of the mainstream media basically try to say, well, we're just talking about the facts and the truth and honest analysis without saying, hey, no, we're coming at this from a decidedly liberal or a decidedly conservative standpoint. That's why I'm oftentimes so disappointed with, say, Vox, because they pretend to be this kind of neutral arbiter of explaining the news when it seems to me patently obvious that they have a pretty clear left-wing bias. Now, a lot of times I share that bias, but I wanted to be honest about it. Same thing Fox News on the right.
Yeah. So, no, I agree with that 100%. And I'll tell you, that's one of the biggest frustrations of a conservative living in America is the sense that the New York Times and the Washington Post call it straight down the middle, whereas anything else is far right. I agree. Yeah, I think it's much better to have sort of truth in labeling. And also, I would on the weekend after the election, I would forgive you a little bit of triumphalism with the Democrats taking the House. That's necessarily just that's part. And look, that's a little bit of the fun of this. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, we talk about serious stuff, and yes, I think it is a national tragedy that the Democrats are taking the House and Nancy Pelosi will be Speaker. But I also,
but on the lighter side,
on the lighter side, as a conservative, look at the big, sweeping scope of history sort of thing, and the Democrats taking the House. I look at this as not tremendously changing the course of history. I'd rather the outcome had been different, but again, we don't have to dig ourselves into foxholes on every issue.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, there was another listener comment in response to our midterm show. Jesse wrote in saying, I hate to say it, but I really don't think Mike is far enough left to be your show's backstop idea guy for half of the country. While, to your credit, you always acknowledge that there is a progressive wing to the Democratic Party, this admission is typically couched in a dismissive, they're crazy, but we put up with them kind of way. Yeah. In the most recent episode in which Mike didn't think that Trump will be impeached, it really struck me how unrepresentative of the left Mike's views really are. This doesn't mean that Mike isn't a great guy and a great co-host for the show, just that he shouldn't be the left's chief defender on your allegedly balanced show. The fact that Mike remains deeply skeptical of the Mueller probe, despite the mounds of public evidence, criminal guilty pleas, and felony convictions, makes him unqualified to be the sole advocate for the left. Surely you can find someone who follows the Trump-Russia case in detail and is of the very common opinion that Trump is a career criminal and that this will result from Mueller's eventual report will make Watergate look like a minor tiff at a garden party. He says, I'm not saying Mike should hold this position. Mike is just fine the way he is. I'm just saying that if Mike can't steel man this position, you should bring on someone who will. Otherwise, you're going to look extremely naive when the Trump administration implodes in an apocalypse of criminal convictions, and your show hasn't even considered this as a possible outcome. Your unrepresented listener, Jesse.
All right. Well, there's always Ken.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's one of my common responses is that, Ken is to the left of me. Now that I mentioned that to someone earlier, and they said, well, yeah, but Ken supported Pelosi as speaker, but on the Russia issue, Ken is definitely to the left of me. But I wanted to first correct the misconception. I'm not skeptical of the Mueller probe. I mean, I'm waiting for the probe to conclude and for there to be some sort of a report that was, I don't know what sort of evidence Robert Mueller's gathered. Nobody knows. I mean, well, that's people inside the investigation.
A couple people know, yeah.
But from what,
and I can hazard some guesses.
Yeah, but from what we can tell, this is a remarkably tight operation. It's been fairly not leak proof, but they've held things pretty close. And I don't know what they're going to conclude, but I don't want to jump to any conclusions. You're right. They certainly have, there have been some charges, there have been some guilty pleas and so forth, but to me, I'm still waiting. And if the weight of the evidence to me suggests that Donald Trump is demonstrably beyond a reasonable doubt criminally culpable or having, has engaged in certain treasonous activities, then I absolutely do think he should be impeached and convicted. But my sense of things is that's not going to happen. But if that does happen, I absolutely want him to be impeached and convicted, despite what I would see to be the potentially negative political ramifications. This is just my sense of it, and I could be wrong, is I think that the president insulated himself enough from any sort of direct involvement in whatever was determined to be going on so that it will not rise to the level of where, enough senators will vote to convict or even where there'll be impeachment proceedings. So if that means I'm skeptical, I guess that's my position.
No collusion. That's what I hear you saying, Mike.
I am definitely not saying that. I'm saying I haven't seen enough evidence to act. And I would like to think that this is the standard of proof we should hold, regardless of who the president is.
That's sort of the core value I think that both of us try to uphold, is that we're not going to we'll you reserve judgment till you have the evidence.
Yeah. And on the other part of what Jesse had to say, I think he has a point. I am not as progressive as some progressives. I wouldn't call myself a progressive. I mean, I call myself a Burkean liberal, which means by definition, I'm skeptical.
Just kind of like a Jewish nun.
Yeah. But. Well, but anyway, but I'm skeptical of massive change for a lot of reasons. And I've talked about this at, great length, both of us have in the past. And so that's one of the reasons why we're looking at bringing on people who are a little bit more. So in that sense, I think, yeah, Jesse, you're right. And I think, Jesse makes a good point, is saying that I shouldn't try to be someone I'm not, because that would come off as inauthentic and fake. But that's why we have Ken on sometimes. And that's why, whether it's going to be Alexandra or Athena or somebody else, that I think, yeah, it's nice to have a more left of center voice than me on the show, and we're working to do that. And I think, yeah, you're right, Jesse. So there you go.
I'd also defend you on another
thank you, Jay.
Account of that. Yeah. Well, what we try to do here, there's sort of two components to it, and one is analysis, and the other is sort of advocacy. And I tend to think, and I hope that the analysis is the bigger piece of it, right? And I think sometimes people confuse the two. And just because you say that you don't think Trump will get impeached, that's sort of your analytical view, just based on what you know and the politics of it. It's not necessarily your argument that he shouldn't be impeached.
Right.
And likewise, I get sort of the same blowback a lot of times, where I'll say something about I'm in favor of some Trump policy, or I'm not against people who are against some Trump policy enough, or I simply say I don't think something will happen that just because I don't think it'll happen. That's sort of analysis, and again, analysis is always to some extent colored by where you're coming from ideologically. But it's not a sense of being just a blind cheerleader and saying this is the way this is what I think will happen because this is what I want to happen.
Yeah, and I think there's that distinction between what I think might be best politically for the party I identify with, and also what I think, and sometimes what's best politically is not what I think is in the best interest of the country or the institutions in the long term. Like, for instance, in this case, if there's reasonable evidence that Donald Trump, in fact, was directly involved in high crimes and misdemeanors, however we want to define that, then I think he absolutely should be impeached. And I want it to go to a Senate trial, even if he is not, in the end, convicted, because it's important to hold people to account. And that might mean be bad for my party, as I call them, in terms of political ramifications. It might even be worse, you could argue, if President Trump is impeached and convicted in the short term, because then you get a President Pence and that sort of thing. I've talked about that. But at some point you have to say, well, what's the best thing in the long term for the health of these institutions? And that's one of my big problems with Donald Trump, is that I don't think he cares at all about our institutions. And that, to me, I think is just tragic. That transcends party.
Yeah. And with that, I'll just remind listeners that I think, from an analytical standpoint, that Trump will not get impeached, or there will be no impeachment proceedings. I think you're wrong.
You think there will be impeachment proceedings, and I think there don't.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Absolutely. Okay. Moving on.
I don't want there to be impeachment proceedings, but I'm just, the way I look at it, I think there probably will be.
Yeah. Well, we will see. Certainly.
We'll see.
Yep. All right. You might recall, Jay, that also that same last week we did the show that we did a story on the FDA and e-cigarettes.
Yes.
And I made that sort of offhand kind of comment, like, "Oh, geez, come on! Like, you really need fruit flavored e-cigarettes to quit smoking. That seems like a ridiculous argument." Well, I heard about it from some listeners. Zach was one of them. He wrote it on politicsguys.com, and he said, "I'm sorry, but the ignorance from Mike on the e-cig conversation is absolutely astounding." Yeah, it's always a good start. "I started smoking, the real thing, as a freshman in high school and had no trouble getting them. Prior to quitting cigarettes 4 years ago with the assistance of e-cigs, I was smoking 2 packs a day, and guess what, Mike? My go-to flavor was one of those candy-flavored nicotine products. Fruit Loops, followed closely by strawberry milkshake and lemon meringue pie. Despite you claiming it to be a stretch, if I was restricted to basic tobacco flavors, I never would have quit." And Zach wasn't the only one who wrote in. He went on to, he was actually really helpful, and he included some links in his comments to help educate me on this. And a couple other listeners wrote in along similar lines. And, it was one of those cases where it was just sort of a throwaway line on my part. And they had a good point. I hadn't really done my homework on that particular point. I was just saying something. And that's the one thing I love about our audience is oftentimes when we do something like that, listeners will say, "Hey, I don't think you really thought this through." And when that happens, I'm happy to say, well, show me the evidence. Zach was willing to do that. We had, actually, one of the other people who commented in is someone who I'm hoping to interview for a future show. And so I just contacted her, an author, and she said, "Yeah, I saw your e-cigarette thing, and you're totally wrong on that." She's an economist, actually. It's like, oh, well, okay, maybe I need to look at this a little more. And so I just wanted to say to everyone who commented on that about my ignorance, thank you. I really appreciate it. I did a little more research, and it seems to be a more complex issue than I would have appreciated on the whole candy flavored thing. I was thinking about that, Jan. I thought, well, maybe part of the reason why I kind of made that remark is I actually used to be a smoker many, many years ago. And I quit long before there was any of this e-cigarettes, or even really before nicotine patches. I just quit like a man. Right. I quit. I said one day, I will no longer do this, and that was it for me.
You were only an occasional smoker. I was as I recall.
It was
country night.
I quit Friday nights. I quit all at once after taking 3 or 4 years to be an occasional smoker. That's kind of how that works sometimes. So maybe I'm overestimating my willpower, but maybe part of it was just envy. I didn't have Fruit Loops or lemon meringue pie or anything. I just had to man up and quit and so forth. So I don't know. But anyway.
Even if you had them, you certainly have chosen a more manly flavor.
Certainly, absolutely. But anyway, thanks so much, everyone, for taking the time to comment about that. I really do. I really do appreciate it. So there we go. Okay, moving on. Let's see here. Brian made the following comment on our website, which came after Several listeners raised questions about some of the examples, Jay, that you used in a recent discussion. So I'm not the only one that gets nailed here on this episode. Brian wrote in, what responsibility does a host of the Politics Guys have to truth and facts when forwarding an argument? Given that the purview of the program, as stated in each episode's introductory statement, is to provide rational bipartisan civil debate, is there not a danger in allowing unsubstantiated rumor to be used as illustrative examples that forward a partisan position? While most of the program's hosts from all sides of the political spectrum appear to respect this intent, striving to utilize historical evidence and research conducted by respected third parties, and always clearly indicating when they're drawing upon personal presuppositions in their argument, Jay seems to have progressively tipped over into a more anecdotal, even conspiratorial style of rhetoric. From his repeated denigration of the liberal media, which he seems to extrapolate out into a concerted effort to discredit all conservatism, his allusions to a dark web infiltrating the FBI and DOJ, his embrace of any whisper around Clinton family impropriety, past suggestions that protesters at rallies are paid operatives, to some of his most recent episodes' assertions about rampant voter fraud at Democratic candidates smeared for sexual impropriety and claims of election fixings by a crook in Florida, Jay seems willing to entertain and even actively promote specious, unverified innuendo that muddies the water of any civil, substantive discussion. With a president and White House that have spent the past 2 years brazenly embracing dissembling and fraud, now willing to contradict demonstrable evidence if it disproves their assertions and release doctored video footage to discredit members of the media, is it not more important than ever for figures such as yourselves to maintain a level of rhetorical decorum that at least respects the principles of fact-based reasoning? There we go. So, Jay, have at it.
Well, I guess on the first, that was a long list.
That was a long list.
On most of those things, I'm not quite sure what the listener's talking about.
Okay.
I don't think I ever talked about paid protesters. I don't think what were some of the other ones?
Let's see. Denigration of liberal media.
Well, I do that, I suppose. Yeah. Again,
that was the first one.
I think, look, to the extent I believe that most of the mainstream media is liberal. I'm hardly alone in that, and I think you can find plenty of examples. And I've used those examples. And if you want to call that anecdotal, well, I mean, it's also you could just read the stories. But
the second
what else
one,
was there?
The second one was a dark web infiltrating the FBI and DOJ.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I've certainly called out that there are issues when you have sort of the stroke page texts. I think it's, again, not unreasonable to take a view that the Department of Justice does not support President Trump, and that there are efforts to make sure he was not president or make sure his presidency was not successful. Again, see sort of the, again, Andrew McCabe, or the memo regarding the 26th Amendment. That sort of thing.
Well, let me ask you this.
That's a dark web. But.
Okay, yeah, let me ask you this, because I think maybe it's a phrasing thing. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth when you say the Department of Justice didn't want him to be president. Now, I can see where people would. Okay, yeah, because I could hear where people would sit and say, well, there was a concerted effort by the department as an institutional entity. Now, you could be saying that, or you could be saying that there are certain individuals in the department who said things and perhaps even did things that may have. So I don't know which. I don't. Again,
I would say there were certain individuals. Those individuals tend to operate at high leadership positions.
Yeah. Now, the inspector general said that they said things, but they didn't actually do things, and that was in the one investigation that was done of that. Yeah. And so that would be I would think we talked about that before, but okay. Let's see. The third thing.
I would say, let's put it this way: my inference is not without basis in fact.
Okay. The next thing is your embrace of any whisper around Clinton family impropriety.
I'm not sure about that one exactly. I need more specifics on.
We've talked about
because there's look. I mean, let's be straight here. There are a lot of Clinton family improprieties.
At least alleged ones.
Right?
Yeah.
You gotta. For example, let's put it this way. No, did I believe that Hillary Clinton was running a child kiddie porn ring out of a
Pizza.
Washington pizza shop? No, I felt that was kind of far-fetched. Am I concerned with the fact that the amount of money the Clinton Foundation raked in during its existence, during her tenure as Secretary of State, is tied to um, favors or attempts by foreign governments to curry favors? Yeah, I think that's a concern, and I think that'll be a concern for a lot of people. I'm concerned that Bill Clinton received a $500,000 payment from the Russian government, yet we're talking about concerns over Russian collusion and Facebook ads.
Which is
Yeah.
not to say, I would hope, that you're not concerned about this stuff when Republicans are the targets.
No, of course not.
Okay, I just wanted to make that, because there's that whole argument of, it's sometimes called on discussion forums that was it Me Tooism?
What about is?
Yeah, what about ism? I knew it was an ism. And so, I mean, it's not saying that, well, because they do it, it's okay that we do it or something like that.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
But I mean, I think again, those are legitimate things. Those are actual facts. Those are this is not some conspiracy theory that I've simply made up.
All right.
I mean, it's off record. He took the money. He made a speech in Russia. He took the money.
Well, it's one thing to say that there are certain issues that potentially could be linked to something that's improper, unethical, or illegal. It's another thing to say that there is sort of a deep, thoroughgoing conspiracy to whatever, defraud or run a criminal enterprise, or that somehow the RICO statutes apply to the Clinton organization in some way.
I don't think I've said any of that.
Right, but I mean, I think sometimes people make that connection. That's all I'm saying.
All right.
So,
no, on the voter fraud issue in Florida, yeah, I absolutely stand by what I said there, and I think I even cited to the Miami Herald was where I was getting my information. And you could look at the various court filings against Brenda Snipes, the court outcomes, what the court has said, and she recently tendered her resignation after all of this. So again, I'm happy to stand by that portion. I certainly remember saying those things. Mm-hmm. And again, I if you'd like, I can get more references to where the Snipes escapades are chronicled. Yeah. But again, this is not something that is sort of these, that I pulled off Breitbart or some far right thing or some fake news Facebook kind of post.
I feel that even though you and I disagree on a lot of things, we do share that commitment to the facts, and so in instances, and I think this ties in really well with the previous listener comment on the e-cigarette thing, is that I know when I am presented with data that challenges something that I say on the show, I'm sometimes, I wouldn't say necessarily I'm happy to look at it. It hurts to be wrong, obviously, but I believe that that's an important value. That's a critical value. And if somebody shows me that I was misguided, or perhaps that I didn't consider all the facets of a story, of a topic, then I want to know about it. And I'm gonna come out and try to make that correction, retraction, whatever, just as prominently as I made that statement. And Jay, I think that you share that commitment, right?
Yeah, there was one time I was wrong about Texas voter ID laws.
There you go. So yeah, so please, if listeners,
but nothing else occurs to me at the time.
Well, you're wrong a lot, but anyway. But yeah, if you hear us, if you think that we're factually wrong, if we're missing on something, we want to hear from you. We're not just going to bury it and try to ignore what you're saying. We're imperfect as well, and so if you can correct us on something, please do. We'd love to hear from you. So, all right. I think that pretty much does it for listener questions, comments, that sort of thing. But Jay, before we go, oftentimes we do a what we're reading sort of thing, and there's something I've been reading lately. I just wanted to mention to folks. Mm-hmm. It's I read a lot of books. That's probably a good thing. And a lot of books.
Mike reads more books than anyone I have ever known. Really, and I mean that quite. That's a tremendous compliment. I mean,
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of, it
And
goes.
and all the books of like all kind of everything. I mean, I can remember when we were roommates, you would read like a book a night. I mean, it was
I'm eclectic, I guess would be the
yeah.
kind way of saying it. But one of the books I'm reading right now is a book called Why Liberalism Failed. It's by a political philosopher out of Notre Dame, Patrick Deneen. It's an amazing. This is one of those books that even if you disagree with it, it's a fascinating thesis. And his idea is essentially that liberalism, this hundreds of years old experiment,
And that
has
being the broader sense of liberalism, not what we would
yeah,
talk
liberal
to American
democracy.
liberalism. Yeah, yeah.
Liberal democracy has essentially failed us. And the whole argument is really not so much intricate, but the biggest part of it is that, well, essentially, we set up a system where we have basically we have two sort of supports for our, if you will, culture, and those are just the market or the state. And increasingly, there are no other alternatives. We've destroyed everything but the market or the state. And this idea, which is a very, I felt, kind of Burkean idea in many ways,
I was
that
gonna say Burke would be upset about that.
exactly, that there used to be these smaller, more organic institutions that were built up from local customs and communities and belief systems. That's largely gone away, and it's been destroyed in large part by either the market and the state. And he argues that it's actually kind of a false dichotomy, that we have this whole liberals versus conservatives, when really they're essentially both fighting against these kind of organic, smaller base institutions, where on the conservative side, the argument is all about markets are the solution for everything, and we should leave everything to the market. On the liberal side, it's we should leave everything to the state. But at the basis of this, he argues, is this fundamental belief that individual freedom, which means essentially, in the modern sense, the liberty to do whatever the heck you want as long as it doesn't actively harm someone else, is the key good. And he argues that this has made us these kind of atomized, disconnected people, and it's destroyed our communities and destroyed our society.
Sort of John Stuart Mill was wrong.
Exactly. The John Stuart Mill was.
Yeah, I haven't read the book. I've read reviews of the book.
So that's and it's, and I find myself reading this and going, yeah, but because of course this argument works really well if, say, you were part of sort of that dominant culture and you felt comfortable in it and so forth. And what does this mean though if you don't put individual freedom first? What does this mean for groups that never fit into, or people that never fit into that dominant culture? My guess is that's kind of the argument as well. That's the price you pay for having this cohesive culture. Some people have to be forced to fit into something that they don't want to fit into. And I, as a product of this culture, have problems with that argument, certainly. But, and it goes back to this sort of older idea that what do we mean by liberty? Well, the current idea of liberty, Jay, you just said, John Stuart Mill, it's that it's liberty too. I can do whatever I want. But the ancient kind of Greek philosopher sort of idea of liberty was more of a liberty from. It's how can I free myself from these destructive passions and these destructive desires that enslave me? And that's a very different conception, and that leads to a very different kind of political world, if that's what you believe the real liberty is. And I have a certain amount of sympathy for this, being sort of a more or less kind of a practitioner or believer in a lot of what Stoicism and one of those philosophies has to say about that. So I'm only about halfway through it, but it's an amazing book. I'm hoping that when I get done with it, I'll be able to actually interview Deneen. I think it'd be a great show, but I would highly recommend the book. So that's what I'm reading these days.
Well, that sounds good. I'm just going to comment briefly because what it reminds me a little bit of is, and this is a famous piece of conservative history, if you're really into like conservative geekdom, Whittaker Chambers' review of Atlas Shrugged in National Review. This was this huge splinter that between the conservative movement and sort of the Ayn Rand libertarians, and Chambers sort of brought on the sort of the same criticism that Rand proposed this very cold, completely market-based libertarianism where everyone would just do their own thing, and if that you weren't really a producer. If you weren't doing something worthwhile, then in his words, get thee to the gas chamber.
Yeah.
And I think so much of what traditional conservatism is to me is it's balanced by two ideas, and one is the free market and that economic liberty. But it's also, there is the religious or spiritual or whatever you want to call it, that while we acknowledge this market liberty, we also acknowledge that we are not at liberty to certain other factors, right? And whether that's dedicating yourself to religious principles, or even if it's just some community ethical principles, and when a more Burkean traditional kind of style, that kind of counterbalances the market excesses.
Yeah, that idea that people like us don't do things like that. Why? Just because we don't, basically.
Yeah.
And
exactly. then it may be permissible, but it's not right, and we're not going to do it.
And the cost of that sort of cohesion that you get from that is that person who says, but I want to do that, then the answer is, well, too bad. You have to sort of subsume your individuality for the sake of the greater good. And that's a way of thinking that I mean, that's very non-Western at this point, essentially, because we've been inculcated in this sort of the individual expression of, flying your freak flag is sort of the ultimate good. And generally speaking, if you're outside of a religious tradition, that's not something that is appealing to you. And that's why I think part of me says yes, but because of that. So anyway, that's my thoughts on that. So
well, that's good. I'm going to really briefly, what I'm reading, because it kind of just a weird twist of fate kind of falls in the same category. Lionel Trilling's The Moral Responsibility of Being Intelligent.
Ooh.
Which is just a collection of his essays, and I found this on Amazon. It was one of those like really cheap or free, just looking for something. But Lionel Trilling is one of these fantastic commentators from the early 20th century, who is, I don't think you'd necessarily describe him as conservative, although conservatives sort of adopted him. He was kind of a liberal in his day and sort of like an iconoclast. But it's fascinating, just kind of criticisms on what it means, what liberalism means, and again, liberalism in the bigger Western civilization type context, like that Mike's talking about here. So that's what I'm reading, and it's fun, and he's a fantastic writer and fun to read. And I always like getting that sort of bit of cultural criticism from 100 or 80 years ago, just to get a sense of how things looked then and as to how they look now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all right. Well, that does it for this week. And everyone, again, remember, Jay and I are now doing that very special policy type of thing every 3 weeks or so. And that's for anyone who is a Patreon supporter at the $5 level or above. And to see all about that and our goals and tiers and levels and all kinds of crazy stuff, politicsguys.com/support, or just go to politicsguys.com and click on support. And also, if you could share this episode, if you feel it's worth sharing, that would be great. We would appreciate that. Reviews and ratings on iTunes also helps. And of course, if you want to get in touch with us, mail@politicsguys.com. There's our Facebook page, which has been the site of all sorts of interesting stuff in recent weeks. That's facebook.com/politicsguys page.
And people on the Facebook page, be cool.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, very much so.
Be cool.
Good
right?
point. And we're also on Twitter @politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Ondorf, Will Miller, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show is produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Saturday. We hope you'll join us.